Michael Nugent is a co-founder of Atheist Ireland, and Dan and I have been privileged to be at several events there with Atheist Ireland and Atheist International, and have really learned a lot of perspective of going over there and realizing that although half of our nation believes Jesus is in our Constitution, in Ireland Jesus really is in their Constitution. So it's a different kind of battle between church and state. And Michael is a published author and playwright. Popular play that he did about a sports play, musical, that played in Ireland for several years. And he's been basically a full-time atheist activist in the last few years because it's so important right now what is going on in Ireland. And he'll tell you more about it. There's a blasphemy law, and that has impacts globally on the blasphemy situation. And I think that it's very important in this insular nation that we realize what problems are in other parts of the world. And we're very pleased to have Michael Nugent here.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me here today. Thanks in particular to Annie and Dan, and to the Freedom from Religion Foundation and for all the work that it does. Thanks also to the Triangle Free Thought Society, in particular Sue and Kim and Harry, who have been very welcoming and shown me around for the last couple of days. And thanks to everybody here for being part of the growing international movement for what we in Atheist Ireland describe as promoting atheism and reason and ethical secularism. And it is growing, it's growing around the world. There's a group called the World Values Survey, which is an interdisciplinary team of social scientists around the world that have been mapping human values over the last 20 years. And they're finding that around the world, as individuals move from survival values towards self-expression values, which is triggered by investment in health and education and communications technology and moves towards democracy, then societies move towards secular, rational values and away from traditional religious values. So we are swimming with the tide of history in the work that we're doing, and I think that we can be optimistic, regardless of how difficult any particular situation may seem to be. I'm going to talk briefly about three things. I'm going to talk about Ireland and atheism and secularism in Ireland. I'm going to talk about blasphemy laws internationally, and finally I'm going to talk about the need to normalise the word atheism in social and political discourse. First, in terms of atheism and secularism in Ireland, until very recently Ireland was a monolithic Catholic state. In fact, the Republic of Ireland here in Northern Ireland is different. It was a monolithic Catholic state, dominated by two institutions, the Catholic Church and a political party called Fianna Fáil, which is a populist and infested with corruption political party. I'll give you one example of how it governed Ireland. This is a true story. It was a by-election, an important by-election some years ago, and there was one housing estate. And the message coming back from the voters through the canvassers was, they're not interested in the economy, they're not interested in unemployment, they're not interested in the recession, they're not interested in emigration. They have a new housing estate and they've been promised that there would be trees landscaping their housing estate, and they haven't got it, and so they're not voting for us. And on the morning of the by-election, a team of council workers arrived and planted trees alongside the housing estate. And they lost the by-election, and 3 days later they came and took the trees back again. Now, for most of the last century, that political party, along with the Catholic Church, has also worked to keep Ireland Catholic. We have a constitution, as Annie said, that begins with saying that all authority comes from the Holy Trinity and refers to our obligations, our humble obligations to our divine Lord Jesus Christ. We have a clause in our constitution that says that the state acknowledges that the homage of public worship is due to Almighty God, which, if you think about it for more than a second, is not even a clause vindicating the right of citizens to worship a God. It's a clause vindicating the right of this God to be worshipped by the citizens, as if the creator of the universe needs the Irish constitution to vindicate its rights. I was born in Ireland in the 1960s, where in the first census after I was born, 95% of people said that they were Roman Catholic. 99.5% said they were Christians of some variety. And less than half of 1% said that they had no religion. Divorce was illegal, abortion was and still is illegal, contraception was illegal. The Catholic Church in the meantime in the background was covering up the rape and abuse of children with the active complicity of the Irish state in many cases. As late as the 1990s, Richard Branson's Virgin Megastore was taken to court in Dublin and fined for selling a condom. We had laws regulating condoms brought in via a bizarre piece of legislation that said that you could buy condoms if you had a doctor's prescription saying that you were a married couple and you were required the condom for bona fide family planning purposes. So that's the Ireland that I grew up in, and thankfully it's changed a lot for a couple of reasons. One is, I think, economic and social development, making the same differences to religiosity in society in Ireland as has been happening around the world. The second is, of course, the fact that the Catholic Church has been exposed as having been covering up rape and abuse, particularly in Ireland, but also obviously internationally, because their method of dealing with it was sending priests abroad in order to prevent them from being prosecuted. So Ireland has moved on. The most recent surveys in Ireland internationally have, one 2 years ago by Win Gallup internationally, showed that 47% of Irish people say they're religious, less than half, which is a massive, massive change in a short period of time. And that's compared to 59% internationally. Ireland is now one of the least religious countries in the world. We also have, there was an interesting survey around the time of the Eucharistic Congress, which was held in Dublin recently. And that survey, 75% of Irish Roman Catholics don't believe in transubstantiation, which is of course one of the central theological fundamentals of Catholicism. 50% of Irish Roman Catholics don't believe in hell. 15% of Irish Roman Catholics don't believe that Jesus was the Son of God. And my personal favourite is 8% of Irish Roman Catholics don't believe in God. which I would have thought was a pretty low hurdle for being a Roman Catholic. So the Catholic Church has lost the moral influence that it had claimed and pretended to have for so long. Fianna Fáil is also out of power. Two of its recent prime ministers were up before tribunals for over corruption charges. One of its justice ministers ended up in jail for tax evasion. So thankfully that party and the Catholic Church are now on their knees in the right sense in Ireland. And Ireland, once a Catholic country, is a pluralist country, but unfortunately still the Catholic laws. That's still a difficulty. We still have laws that I'll mention in a second. But before I mention that, I just want to say, presumably some of you are wondering why somebody is here from Ireland talking to you about Ireland without asking you to support the IRA, which seems to be traditional among Irish people over here. And it's because most Irish people believe that the IRA are murderers and do not support the IRA. It's important that people realise that most Irish people are Democrats, and that the mythology that has reached Irish America about the IRA representing the Irish people is just that, it's mythological. I was involved with a lot of other activists before getting involved in Atheist Ireland, campaigning against the IRA and against loyalist terrorists in Northern Ireland. And we organised peace pickets outside their conferences. We organised a peace train to enable people to show solidarity with people on either side of the border when somebody in the IRA had the bright idea of trying to unite Ireland by blowing up the rail line, which was one of the links between the two parts of the island. And the IRA, I'll tell you one other thing about them, that some of them are not the most ethically bright people in the world. They, in the 1970s, the IRA used to use condoms as part of the timing mechanism in bombs and the internal devices that they were using to blow people up. And some IRA members were opposed to using condoms on moral grounds. So thankfully we've moved beyond that. Thankfully, although we still have a lot of problems in Ireland, thankfully the problem is that you don't have people having to look under their cars every morning and looking to see whether they're going to be blown up when they turn the ignition key. And it's also important to know that that was only in one part of the island. There are two countries in Ireland 101, there are two countries on the island of Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, which is an independent, largely Catholic state, although the state's moved on, and Northern Ireland, which is part of the United Kingdom, which is a disputed state in sectarian terms, with a majority of Protestants and a minority of Catholics. And when Ireland was partitioned, what you really had was a sectarian Protestant state in Northern Ireland, a sectarian Catholic state in the Republic of Ireland. But the difference was, in Northern Ireland, there was a large enough minority of Catholics to be able to stand up for themselves and not be totally oppressed. Now, unfortunately, that ended up manifesting itself in terrorism. But in the Republic of Ireland, there were so few Protestants that they essentially either emigrated or kept their heads down politically, and so the Republic became a monolithic Catholic state. Now, as I said, the population has moved on in the Republic of Ireland, but unfortunately the laws haven't. We still have that constitution that I was telling you about. There are other things in the constitution. The offence of blasphemy is in the constitution. The president, judges, members of the Council of State, which include the Prime Minister, are required by the constitution to swear a religious oath in order to take office, which means that a conscientious atheist cannot legally hold those offices in Ireland. The Catholic Church still officially runs. Looking at that, the video yesterday about trying to stop religious influence getting into schools in the United States was quite poignant for me to watch, because in Ireland we have the opposite problem. The Catholic Church officially runs 90% of the primary schools in Ireland, funded by the state, teachers' salaries paid by the state, run by the Catholic Church, with an official Catholic ethos that is not restricted to the religious instruction classes, but permeates the entire curriculum. So you can't even opt your child out of the formal religious instruction elements, because in nature study they'll be taught that God created the birds and the bees, and the music classes they'll be singing hymns. And it's a really, really difficult situation to deal with. We also have a clause that was largely influenced by the Catholic Church put into our constitution, making abortion unconstitutional, which was put in the 1980s. And without going into a lot of detail about that, the situation in Ireland with abortion now is the government has been forced by a combination of legal factors to bring in the most restrictive version of abortion laws that they could get away with, consistently with respecting the human rights of pregnant women. So we have just a very small step forward, where abortion is now legal in Ireland, where there is a threat to the life as opposed to the health of a pregnant woman. But in other circumstances it's still illegal. Even in cases like rape and incest and fetal abnormality, abortion is still illegal in Ireland. We've still such a long way to go. Also in Ireland, assisted dying is illegal. Now I know that's the case in a lot of parts of America as well. But it's a case that I campaign on particularly, and it's particularly close to my heart because my wife died a few years ago of cancer, and she had made preparations to take her own life if she needed to avoid unnecessary suffering. And what's really important for people to understand about that issue is that it's portrayed as if it's about people wanting to die, but it's not about people wanting to die. It's about people wanting the peace of mind that they get while they're still alive from knowing that they have the option to avoid unnecessary suffering. And whatever about borderline ethical issues on that, when you're talking about people who are terminally ill, and it is purely a question of when and how they die rather than whether they die, the only argument against that is theological. And it is a purely secular issue to have assisted dying in those circumstances made legal. Talking about dying, another incident in Ireland recently, this is just before Atheist Ireland was founded, a woman died in County Donegal, which is close to the border with Northern Ireland. And she was an atheist, and her son couldn't bury her because all of the graveyards in the county were run by churches. So he eventually brought her across the border to Northern Ireland and buried her in a municipal graveyard in Derry. And the Irish Times was following up with the story, and they said, yeah, we have different sections for different religions, so yeah, we take anybody. And they said, the Irish Times asked them, so how many people do you have in your atheist section? And they said, oh, we don't have an atheist section, we put her in with the Protestants. So that's the context in which Atheist Ireland was founded 5 years ago. And what we do is we campaign on various things. We campaign to promote atheism and reason, over superstition and supernaturalism, and we campaign for an ethical secular state where the state doesn't give any support or preference to either religion or to atheism. We would be as opposed to a state that promotes atheism as we are to a state that promotes religion. We involve ourselves in political lobbying, both of the government and opposition political parties. We provide briefing documents to parliamentarians when bills are going through that are relevant to secularism. We have briefing sessions in the Parliament with TDs, who are members of Parliament. We regularly make submissions to and appear before both parliamentary committees in Ireland on various issues, but also international human rights regulatory bodies like the United Nations, the European Union, the OSCE. We have a very important meeting coming up now in Geneva in a few months' time, where Ireland is up before the United Nations Human Rights Committee in a sort of a regularly scheduled review of how it's implementing its human rights obligations. And for the first time, this will be the first one since Atheist Ireland was founded, we're going to be there making sure that atheist and secular issues are represented in what's being discussed. As Annie was saying earlier on, we're kind of like in the opposite position to what you have here, in that you have secular laws that you're trying to have enforced, and we're still in the position of trying to get secular laws implemented. One of the most serious is the blasphemy law. Ireland passed a new blasphemy law in 2009. For reasons that I won't go into because it's too complicated, but for reasons that they claimed was a constitutional obligation, but that's debatable. But on the day that those blasphemy laws were introduced, the Atheist Ireland published 25 blasphemous statements on our website. And what we said is, one or two things will happen. Either we'll be prosecuted, in which case we'll challenge the constitutionality of the law, or we won't be prosecuted, in which case that strengthens the political case for repeal of the law, because if we're not going to implement it, then it brings the Parliament and the laws into disrepute. And so, but the more serious impact of that was not really in Ireland. It was that at the United Nations for the last decade or so, the Islamic states led by Pakistan have been trying to get defamation of, initially defamation of Islam and then later defamation of religion, made illegal internationally. And they introduced the wording from the Irish law as what they wanted introduced internationally, and you kind of know that you're doing something wrong when Pakistan is citing you as best practice internationally. So we take a human rights-based approach to all of the political positions that we argue for, and particularly in terms of blasphemy laws. And the most important human rights issues or factors to bear in mind with regard to blasphemy laws are that human rights apply to individuals. They don't apply to groups or religions, they apply to individuals, and they apply to every individual equally, without discrimination. And our position is that we should respect people as individuals, but we don't have to respect their beliefs. We can respect their right to hold their beliefs, but we don't have to respect the content of their beliefs. And the slogan that we use to articulate that is, you have rights, your beliefs do not. And that's the basis of all of our campaigning on blasphemy-related issues, but it's also the basis of the other policies that on secularism that we promote as well. And I would ask people here, as well as campaigning on the issues that you have here in the United States, to also take time to campaign internationally on the blasphemy issues. It can make quite a difference on various issues just to have international pressure, particularly on some individual cases. It can delay executions in some cases. But it's astonishing. It's astonishing how fundamental the infringements of human rights are, particularly in Islamic states, on blasphemy laws. I'll give you one quick example, which is a woman called Asia Bibi, who is a 45-year-old mother who is currently in jail in Pakistan awaiting execution by hanging for allegedly blaspheming against Muhammad. And two politicians in Pakistan who spoke up for her, the governor of Punjab and the minorities minister in the government, both who was a Christian. The governor of Punjab was a Muslim. Two politicians spoke up for her, and both of them were murdered. One of them murdered by his own bodyguard, and the other murdered after he had predicted that he would be murdered. And what happens in Islamic states, in terms of blasphemy laws, and Asia Bibi's case was exactly following this pattern, is you have personal disputes between people. In this case, it was a trivial dispute over a goat breaking a trough in a neighbour's garden that had created tension between this woman and her neighbours. And then she was out working in the fields as she did with her Muslim co-workers picking fruit, and she went to get water, brought it back, and because she had drunk from the water bowl and she was a Christian, they said that she had contaminated the water. And she said something about Jesus doing more for people than Muhammad. She was accused of blasphemy. And again, this is a pattern that we see again and again and again in blasphemy cases. A mob gathered to attack her. The police were called, and instead of dispersing the mob or arresting the mob, the police arrested Asia Bibi. And she's still waiting. She's just literally last week, there's been a third delay to her appeal on the sentence. So that's an issue that really, it's really important. There's one other person that I'll tell you about in terms of blasphemy laws, a guy called Ben Baz Aziz, who's an Egyptian accountant who was jailed in Kuwait for writing about secularism on a blog, not even for writing about atheism, but for writing about secularism in very respectful terms on a blog. But again, a personal dispute with an employer got translated into a blasphemy charge, and he spent a year in jail in Kuwait. We campaigned strongly for him. He is now released. He's back in Egypt. His situation is still quite sensitive at the moment, but he's in Egypt at the moment. He's writing articles for the Atheist Ireland website now on secularism and Islam. I asked him just if he had a couple of words that he would like to convey to the conference here, and he sent me a message saying he'd like to thank everyone that has worked on his behalf. He said, "Today you are discussing freedom from religion, but sadly today in many countries millions are not able to choose their religion. When I was in Kuwait, even human rights organisations refused to help me because I'm an atheist. Human rights conferences were monitored by national security, and everything said had to be approved by them. Some human rights organisations have become commercial projects with no evaluation of their usefulness in practice." And he suggests several things as steps forward, that international human rights organisations should work with local ones to improve them and train them and evaluate their work, that governments should enforce human rights laws around the world, but particularly through the human rights treaties that a lot of countries have signed up to, that activists should raise the profile of issues to the wider public and the wider media, and that we shouldn't focus only on individual cases, that we should also focus on just the whole concept of the violation of human rights that blasphemy laws represent. The final thing I want to talk about today, I'm trying to cut this kind of short because I want to ensure there's a bit of time for questions, is I've had a lot of discussions just over the last few days here with Harry and Sue and Kim and people from Triangle Free Thought Society about the work that they're doing, the excellent work that they're doing, and that Atheist Ireland is doing similarly in Ireland, about trying to balance the requirements of self-identifying as atheists in a way that's going to alienate some people and trying to build communities at the same time. And I'm going to suggest that however we approach that, we need to normalise the use of the word atheist. I think that we need to be seen to be doing good things while self-identifying as atheists, and that's the only way in practice that we're going to chip away at the prejudice about the word atheist that exists. Because if we retreat from the word atheist while we're doing good things, then people never see self-identified atheists doing good things, and the prejudice continues. And I'm going to make the case, a brief case for what I'm provisionally calling, for the purpose of discussion, is the case for ethical atheism. And the first thing I want to say is that in theory, atheism can be in any position on a scale from passively not believing in gods to actively believing there are no gods. But I believe that atheism, in reality, in real life, is more is necessarily more than a dry disbelief in an assertion of gods. Because if you don't believe in gods, then it necessarily follows, I don't just mean correlation, I mean it necessarily follows that you don't believe that morality comes from gods. And that's a significant position to take. It's a significant worldview in a world where the majority of people do believe that morality comes from gods. And just as theism is in essence an assertion about morality, as well as an assertion about the nature of reality, so too is atheism. Atheism is an assertion about morality. It is saying that morality does not come from supernatural commands, it comes from our natural compassion and empathy and cooperation and reciprocity and sense of fairness and sense of justice. And now atheism doesn't guarantee that you will reach the right decisions morally, but what it does do is it removes a significant obstacle. And that obstacle is not actually religion. It's an underlying obstacle. The underlying obstacle is faith. It's faith and dogma. And by faith I mean believing something disproportionately to the currently best available evidence. And by dogma I mean believing things without questioning them. And those faiths and dogmas can be applied just as easily to secular projects as they are to religious projects. Faith and dogma have helped communism and fascism and the unregulated free market and a range of secular projects to advance further than they should have if there had been appropriate checks and balances and critical thinking applied to them. But the difference between religious faith and dogma and secular faith and dogma is that with secular faith and dogma, eventually it bumps into reality, and you notice that it's not working, and you notice the consequences. Whereas religious faith and dogma hides its testability in an imaginary afterlife. And so you don't get to notice whether it's working, and it can perpetuate itself more easily. And so for that reason, I think it's important intellectually to challenge religious faith and dogma more strongly than secular faiths and dogmas. Obviously, another issue is that religious faiths and dogmas promote these kind of fantastic rewards for eternity, which atheism doesn't. It can seem like a negative thing, it's one of the things that's portrayed like atheism is like a negative concept, but I don't think it is. I mean, that argument is largely based on etymology, on saying that the word is a-theism, and it's not a positive. But you could say the same thing about the words freedom and the words independence. They're both constructed in the same way of defining something by something that they aren't. But nobody suggests that freedom and independence are negative concepts. And equally, I believe that it is reasonable to say that atheism is a positive concept. I think in terms of, I'm going to briefly go over 4 principles that I think we should use to promote ethical secularism. The first is promoting reason and faith reason and science over faith and dogma. And I would suggest that if I was to wander around the town of Raleigh today and tell people that I had good news for them, that I had just been talking today with Bill Gates of Microsoft, and he's going to give them $10 million if they do what I say, that they would apply their critical thinking and probably wouldn't believe me. But if I was to say to the same group of random people that I have good news for them, that I was talking today to the creator of the universe, and that he has promised them an eternity in paradise if they do what I say, I don't know that the people of Raleigh generally, but certainly around the world there's a reasonable proportion of people that would believe me. And the reason they would believe me is that religion corrupts our sense of reality. Normally when we're asked to believe something, what we do, either consciously or unconsciously, is we weigh it up against the evidence. What is most consistent with the evidence? And as the claims become more implausible, we raise the bar of the evidence that we need in order to satisfy ourselves that it's true. But with religion, we do the exact opposite. As the claims become more implausible, we lower the bar of evidence. Because religion encourages us to believe not only implausible claims, but literally untestable claims. And then it insists that we live our lives on the basis of those untestable claims. And that corrupts our sense of reality and leads into the second principle that I think we should promote is in terms of promoting natural ethics over religious commands. It also corrupts our sense of morality. Because morality, we have to start with, morality is a natural function of our brains. We have evolved morality in order to live together as social animals as have other animals that are non-human animals, because cooperation and competition are both evolutionarily useful in terms of survival. So we feel empathy for each other, we feel compassion for each other, we cooperate together, we feel a sense of fairness and a sense of justice. Now there's a range of examples I don't have time to give you today of non-human animals displaying those, so it's not something that is just unique to humans. And in recent generations, humans, because we're able to apply reason to these basic instincts, we have evolved our sense and refined our sense of morality to the extent that we increasingly respect individual conscience, and we increasingly respect the rights of non-human animals, and we just generally refine and increasingly nuance our sense of morality. And it's a difficult enough thing to do, and the reason it's difficult is that there's so many competing factors in terms of figuring out what's the right thing to do. You know, but what religion does is it adds in a corrupting factor to that already difficult task, because what it does is it tells us that even if this is the compassionate thing to do, even if this is the fair thing to do, even if this is the just thing to do, you shouldn't do it because somebody wrote something down in a book 2,000 years ago, or 1,500 years ago, or whatever version of the book that you believe in. And so many Catholics can use that to justify denying condoms to AIDS victims in Africa. And many Muslims can use that to justify the command in the Quran that husbands can beat their wives. And there's a passage in the Quran that best exemplifies this problem, and it is Surah 24:2. And what it says is, the woman and the man guilty of adultery or fornication, flog each of them with 100 stripes. Let not compassion move you in their case in a matter prescribed by Allah. So clearly the reason that that's there is that they were having a problem with people who were supposed to be flogging adulterers, allowing their compassion to prevent them from doing it for the satisfaction of the people that were making the rules. And so they had to add in another rule that they supposedly got from Allah, saying that you don't let your compassion prevent you from doing what we're telling you. So not only is religion not necessary for morality, but religion actively corrupts morality. It's bad for morality. The third of the four principles I want to talk about is promoting inclusive and caring and supported atheist groups. So this is one of the things that the Triangle Free Talk group is doing and planning to do more very effectively. Our groups should be inclusive, they should be caring, they should be supportive of all and diverse, and supportive of new and existing members. We do a lot of things in Atheist Ireland in this context. We had a conference last year that Dan and Annie were at on empowering women through secularism. We're involved in charitable activities in Dublin and also raising funds for entrepreneurs in developing countries through the Kiva loan system. We have general policies of only holding our events in venues that are wheelchair accessible, and we have a range of just standards that we set to ourselves that we don't always meet 100% all the time, but we try to set ourselves standards of behaving ethically. We should try to communicate with each other as respectfully as possible. We can disagree, again, going back to the principles we'll talk about in terms of philosophy law. We can disagree with each other, but we can respect each other as individuals while disagreeing with the content of our beliefs. And I think we have to check the recent tendency, particularly online, in some atheist communities, of atheist advocates publishing personal smears and defamatory allegations about other atheists. It's been happening recently, and it's just not, it's not helpful and it's not ethically correct. Typically how those smears are developing is that people will take the worst possible and least charitable interpretation of something that somebody has said, attack them for that, and then ignore the clarifications that the person has made. And then some people will also demand an apology for what the person has said, that they can then check further as if they're the moral arbiters not only of the need for, but also the content of apologies to be made by people other than themselves, to different people other than themselves. And I think that we've got to start treating each other with respect, and not take an approach which ironically I think the people involved are genuinely believe that they're promoting ethical behaviour, but unfortunately their approach can be caricatured as, actually not really caricatured, it's a mild version, as you have to behave more ethically, you asshole. And you just can't behave like that. The final point I want to make is that I think that we should be promoting fair societies with secular government. Now, in terms of fair societies, that we should be both working in terms of improving our own ethical behaviour within our organisations, but also tackling specific injustices within society that are relevant to religious dogma, and also working with other groups within society that are also marginalised and discriminated against for other reasons. We should take positive actions to improve our community through through charitable activities, through community activities generally, such as the Human Being Project. All things like this, these are very, very useful. And also we should campaign actively to separate church and state. I mean, that's just that should continually be the basis of what we're doing politically. The World Atheist Convention in Dublin a couple of years ago, which Dan and Annie also spoke at, adopted a declaration called the Dublin Declaration on Secularism and the Place of Religion in Public Life, which is available on our website, on the Atheist Alliance International website, and various places around the web. If you have a check for that, it covers personal freedoms, secular democracy, secular education, and one law for all. And it summarises the type of things politically, the type of principles politically that we feel we should be trying to implement. In Atheist Ireland at the moment, we've European and local elections coming up, and we're contacting all of the election candidates of all the parties, asking them to support that secular declaration. So I'll summarise by saying in terms of religion, and how it corrupts us, however implausible the claim that I made earlier, that I spoke to Bill Gates today and he promised them $10 million. It's surely even more implausible to suggest that the creator of a universe of 100 billion galaxies, each of which consists of 100 billion stars like our sun, that he did that so that he could tell one member of one species on one planet to stone a man to death for gathering sticks on the Sabbath, and then impregnate a virgin in order to give birth to himself, and then give Muhammad a rise on a flying horse, and then appear in Joseph Smith's hat in order to attire him in magic underwear. And on the basis of absurd claims like that, Asia Bibi is currently languishing in prison in Pakistan, awaiting execution by hanging for allegedly blaspheming against Muhammad. So I think we have to redouble our efforts to challenge blasphemy laws. We should promote reason and science over faith and dogma. We should promote natural ethics over religious commands. We should promote inclusive care and supportive atheist groups. We should promote fair societies with secular government, and in doing that we should be optimistic about what we're doing. Because we live in an era where in my lifetime there have been massive changes in world geopolitics that we would never have thought would happen. We've had the fall of the Berlin Wall. We've had the collapse of the Soviet Union. We have had the fall of apartheid in South Africa. And even in Irish terms, when we were campaigning against terrorism in Northern Ireland, we were always told it will never stop, it will go on forever, but it has. I was just down yesterday, the day before yesterday, in the City Raleigh Museum, and there was a civil rights movement exhibition, in a history of civil rights movement exhibition there, which included two restroom doors taken from a demolished bank in Raleigh some decades ago, which had signs on them, white men restaurant and coloured men restaurant. And immediately outside that museum, there were ads on the lampposts for some of the events going on today. And just immediately outside that museum, there was an ad for an LGBT pride parade today. And I just thought to myself, that at one time those signs in that museum seemed normal to people, and now an LGBT pride sign immediately outside that museum seems normal. And I think it's a small illustration of the progress that we are making as societies, and that we can be optimistic that we are swimming with the tide of history in promoting atheism and ethical secularism. Thank you very much. Time for a few questions? Okay. Yeah, we'll take some questions.
Come up. Mike.
I occasionally give a talk whose title is "That's Blasphemy, goddammit." And my audiences don't have much trouble with understanding that blasphemy is a rationally unsupportable concept. On the other hand, tolerance seems to be absolutely supportable. And yet tolerance, carried to extreme as it is on some university campuses in this country, leads to students being censured for criticizing religion. So somehow your thoughts about the fine line, are the conceptualization of tolerance as something that still allows criticism.
Yeah, I think the fine line is that you respect individual people, you don't criticise people as individuals, but you can do that while criticising the content of their beliefs. And you can respect the fact that, as we saw in the video yesterday of that woman crying as she was explaining that people are going to go to hell, that people who people can, and this again is the difficulty of religion, people can themselves believe they're doing good while promoting these outrageously both silly and harmful beliefs. So I think that's the key to it, there's no oversimplification. You respect the individual, but you can disrespect the contents of their beliefs. You can challenge ideas while still respecting the people who hold the ideas.
Tolerance for the person, but not for the...
Exactly,
the idea.
Yeah.
I have a question. Since the Catholic Church manages the schools, do they teach creationism or evolution there?
They teach evolution, but they teach the Catholic version of evolution, which is God-guided evolution, which isn't actually evolution. It's just a kind of making-up concept that which really doesn't stand up to any scrutiny theologically, because if you lose Adam and Eve, you lose original sin, and if you lose original sin, you lose the reason for Jesus to come back. So, but they do this, they play these little games of pretending to believe what they can no longer sustainably oppose, but still try and tie it in with their own existing beliefs. One of the things that I should say that Atheist Ireland is working on at the moment, along with there's a small number of multi-denominational schools, very small number of multi-denominational schools in Ireland. Atheist Ireland is currently working with those schools to provide what will be the first ever primary school classes about atheism to be taught in Ireland, and we should hopefully have them ready by the middle of next year. Now, they won't be teaching atheism as truth, they'll be teaching about atheism, and they'll be encouraging children to follow the evidence and use their own critical thinking skills to come to their own conclusions. And it'll be based on, there's a set of principles called the Toledo Guiding Principles on teaching about religion and belief, which is put together by the OSCE. And it essentially is that you shouldn't teach beliefs as being true to children, but you should teach about what people believe in an objective and critical and pluralistic manner.
I have a question. A lot of us have been discussing the Sunday Assembly notion, which started in England with Sanderson and Pippa.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if there's a correlate in Ireland and what you think about that.
Yeah, there was an attempt to set up Sunday Assembly. I don't know if you're familiar with the Sunday Assembly concept. I don't particularly like it myself. I think if people want to do it, that's great. For me, it's a bit too much of sit down, stand up and sing these words and meditate now for a minute and things like that. And I prefer the approach of having more informal gatherings of secular people and just letting the event follow its own natural progress. I'm also not impressed with the fact that the people that found it said pretty soon after they found it that they wanted it to be as un-atheist as possible. and that they were bored with atheism. So that's just, again, that's my personal preference. If people want to do it, or if it's useful for people as a transition to self-identifying as atheists, then that's fine. But I think it's also important that there is also a group of people who are openly self-identifying as atheists while doing good things.
Anything else?
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.